Hey everyone, okay, so back to lesson 1.3, part B. So avoiding bias in a survey design. The thing about surveys, when you're conducting surveys and you're doing all, you're collecting data for your thing, they can provide you a lot of useful information, especially if you, really any type of survey, whether it's going to be more of a census, you're just collecting more objective data, or even when you're trying to do more of a qualitative type of a study and you're going out there conducting surveys, asking questions, having interviews with your participants and whatnot, you can collect a lot of information, and that's great, especially for your study. That's wonderful. But it is really important to try to minimize your bias, because it's so easy to have bias just thrown into your surveying and your data collection without even realizing what you're doing. Okay, so in order to just try to reduce bias, because most likely you're always going to have a little bit of bias. I don't even know if you can really 100% get rid of every bit of bias in a survey, especially if you're doing a sample. Okay, but when you are conducting a survey or you're doing some sort of data collection, you're doing a study, right, you should have several considerations made. You need to be mindful. You need to have certain methods that will allow you to be more mindful and help you reduce the amount of bias. So when you're conducting your survey for your study, sometimes, let's say you went to maybe 100 individuals, okay, and offered them to participate in your survey, and 80 of them said no thank you, I don't want to do this, and only 20 of them said yeah, I'll do it, and they participated in your survey. Well, when people don't choose not to participate in your survey, and yes, of course there will be some people that are going to say no thank you, when they do that, that's non-response. Okay, so when they decide not to participate in your study, that's non-response, and when they choose to participate, that's response. Okay, or that's voluntary response. Now, if you have a really large non-response rate, like in the example I just gave you before, just now, where basically 80% of the individuals that you asked, within your population, said no, you have an 80% non-response rate, and you have a 20% response rate, and that's pretty low. And when you have such a huge non-response rate, there could be a reason why so many people are choosing to not participate in your survey, and why only a select few, like a small population within that within the population of your sample that you're trying to study, decide that they want to participate in your study. So there could actually be a lot of bias there. So you may actually need to go back and kind of look and see what you're asking, what it's all about, try to figure out exactly why people are deciding not to respond. So truthfulness in people's responses. So sometimes respondents, or your participants, whatever you want to call them, sometimes they're going to lie. Okay, many times they lie, and this is bias. Okay, so sometimes people may lie on purpose. All right, they're not telling you the truth on purpose, and it could be because maybe you're asking questions that are too personal, or that are ashamed. They don't feel comfortable telling you the truth about that. And then other times, people could just make up something because they don't actually know the answer. It's too difficult for them to, search for the answer for you. Like, okay, for example, for an example of something that's too personal, like what if you were conducting a study about students who might be cheating on a test, or who cheat on their homework or something like that. And like one of the questions in your survey might be, have you ever cheated on a test? Well, I mean, do you think everyone is going to tell the truth about that one? Probably not, especially if they're still students. Okay, if they're students, it may be too close to home, and it might, bring up other feelings, and they probably don't want to share that side of them just yet. All right, so they're probably going to lie. They might not lie 10 years from now, because they might be like, yeah, I cheated all the time. That's how I got through college. But while they're students, I highly doubt that they're going to tell the truth about something like that. Okay, so if the question is too personal and they don't feel comfortable sharing those type of answers, they might lie about it. And also, if you ask a question that's too difficult for them to answer, then they might make something up. Okay, so like for example, if you were conducting a survey and you wanted to ask a child or someone who's younger about the home prices, 20 years ago, and you might ask a question about, do you know how much your parents paid for their house? Well, if this guy's parents bought the house 20 years ago or more than that, would they really know how much their parents paid for the house? I mean, they might know. They may have had that discussion with their parents, and they might be talking, they might have information, but there's a good chance that they won't have that information. Okay, because when that house was purchased, they were too little to understand, and they never really cared. Okay, it was never really their responsibility to know. All right, so another ways that people can lie inadvertently as well. Like people can lie without really realizing they're lying, and it's not, saying lying is a harsh word, so let's just not say that, but like their truthfulness and their responses may not really be on point. All right, so for example, you could be asking a question in your survey about something that happened a while back. Okay, something that happened a long time ago, and the thing is that they might remember that whole event that happened back then, but the thing is they might be remembering the result of that, or they might be remembering what they like about that memory. They're not going to remember the whole thing. They might not focus or be remembering like the hardship that they went through to get that certain thing, or okay, let me give you an example. Let's say you were asking a question about maybe a student or someone who was like a student athlete. Maybe they did basketball and they went to like some championship and they won. Okay, and this was years ago, so you're asking about it now, and they're probably going to recall the good part about the championship because they won. So they're probably going to be like, yeah, it was great, we played the game and we won, and this guy made this move and we did this and that, and it was great, and we were chanting our songs, and the cheerleaders were great, and all of our family were watching us, and it was, and then we had pizza afterwards, or we threw parties, and who knows. But they probably aren't going to talk about what they went through like during practice, maybe, because they probably went through a lot of rigorous training that they really didn't like. It probably sucked for them to make it to that point, but they're probably not going to focus on that. They might not even remember how rigorous the practices were. They might not remember if if they had like an athletic injury. They might not even remember how badly that hurt, because they're focused on the good part of the memory. Okay, so it's not that they're lying, but the truthfulness of that response, I don't think you're really getting all the information that you're trying to get out of their response. Okay, so there's bias right there. Okay, so hidden bias. Sometimes there's hidden bias in like the questions that we ask our participants for the surveys. Okay, So here's one. Well, here's 3 different types of hidden biases that you can you can sort of catch, and hopefully you'll be able to catch that now whenever you are a participant filling out any kind of survey or anything like that. You can kind of see what they're doing to get a certain response out of you, you know, if they're biased. But anyway, so so you can question the question wording. Can induce a certain response, and I want to use an example of like a software type of a survey. You know how sometimes when you download a software, you're using a certain software, they like to they're always, as soon as you're about to click out of it or you save your thing that you're creating, then they want to get you to talk about how to write a review or rate it, or, you know, they want your opinion of it, right? Well, sometimes they don't do really good. They're not great at their questions that they're asking in those surveys. So sometimes they might be like, hey, how long have you been using this software or this program, and what do you use it for? How do you like it? And the thing is that sometimes you might not use it. All right. They're not including questions that would even entertain the idea that someone might possibly not actually like using the software. Okay. So if you don't even use the software, yet you're asked a question about what you use it for, and you're not really given any kind of response, they're not even giving you the option to say, I don't use it, then you're probably going to make something up or pick the option that is closest to not using it in your opinion. So your answers are going to be very biased. They're not going to get accurate data in that way, right? Also, the order of the questions that you ask, you know, and then the wording that you use to ask those questions can also induce a certain response. So, this happens a lot in politics, I've noticed. Okay, so let me kind of give you a comparison. So back in the old days when Obamacare was happening, you know, Obamacare was coming out, or Obamacare / Affordable Care Act, whatever word you prefer to use. But so sometimes there would be surveys where people would be asked, hey, do you agree with Obamacare, or do you like Obamacare? How do you feel about it? You know, and if you're just looking at Obamacare itself, just the word, and you know, Obamacare itself, people might might already have their preconceived, you know, thoughts or emotions towards Obamacare or the Affordable Care Act, and they might just tell you right there how they feel about it. But if you asked it in this way and said, hey, did you know that more and more people have health insurance than ever before on Obamacare? Do you agree with Obamacare? And it's like knowing that fact and then telling you, hey, do you agree with it? It's sort of, it induces a different response in the person, because if someone said that to me, if I already didn't like Obamacare and I didn't agree with it, but then they told me that, hey, everyone has health insurance now and we're all doing well, do you agree with it? Then I would suddenly be like, well, you can't argue with it. I don't know. Yeah, I guess I agree with it then. You know what I mean? So that would be hidden bias, that you can change the wording and provide people with other information even prior to a question to induce a certain response. And when you do that, well, you're probably not getting accurate data. So also, another thing, the scales of questions might not accurately measure the responses that you're trying to get from your respondents as well. For example, you know those questions, like on Yelp or Google or anything really, where like Amazon also, where they're like asking you about, hey, how are you enjoying this product? Do you like this product? Can you review the product? And then you'll give the product a 1 through 5 type of a answer, right? A rating. When you're doing rating type questions, you really need to make sure that all those feelings that you're trying to evaluate in your respondents, you want to make sure that they fit on the scale. Like the scale is correct. It's the right kind of scale for the kind of questions you're asking. So I suppose that if you're just talking about a product on Amazon and you're going to give it a 4-star rating or anything like that, a 1 through 5 type of a rating scale probably works. That's probably a good range of feelings for that. Because if it was like 1 through 20, rated on a scale of 1 through 20, I would probably have a hard time with that. I think a lot of people would. It would just, you'd be thinking too much. So I do think 1 through 5 works really well for products. But then think about it, like when you go to the doctor or you're in the ER and they always ask you on a scale of 1 to 10, what is your pain level? So that type of a scale, I think that they wouldn't be able to put it, condense it down to like a 1 through 5 scale. So 1 through 10 actually works well because you have like a range of, pain levels to work with or to communicate, So you really do need to kind of make sure, just be mindful about like the type of feelings that maybe the range of feelings that you might be asking your respondents to communicate to you, and try to see if it fits into the scale that you want to use. Okay. Okay, so interviewer influence. This is also something that you need to be very mindful of, especially if you are doing a face-to-face interview. Okay, so this type of a thing is really what we need to worry about, interviewer influence, when we do face-to-face interviews. Okay, and or in-person, phones even can, phone type interviews is also something that you must be mindful of, interviewer influence as well. Because the thing is, the interviewer can actually have influence on the participants, responses to anything. It can go from giving the respondent, a level of comfort for them to, express themselves or to provide information. It could also get the participant to kind of feel like they need to hold back and like they might be judged. So you can make the interview or the participant feel comfortable or uncomfortable. You can even kind of influence the responses as well, given your tone and everything like that. So all your verbal and nonverbal cues that you could be communicating with your body and your facial expressions and then your tone as how you're speaking with your respondent, and that can induce a different type of response in the participant. Okay, so it is really, really important to actually be mindful of what you're doing and to try to keep, stay professional, try to make them feel comfortable, but at the same time, not like you guys are just best friends and they're, they can just make up things or tell you stories or get off topic or, anything like that. So you do want to stay professional, but you also want to make them comfortable enough to speak with you. And you want to not really, your voices, the tone in your voice and your nonverbal cues and everything need to be just so as neutral as possible, okay? And I know that can be hard, but you really need to be mindful of this as a researcher, okay? And also, what many people have found through a lot of work out there, is that it can actually be very beneficial to have your interviewer be part of the same population as the participants, okay, as the research participants. If you're all part of the same population, maybe you're part of the same community, then they actually might feel way more comfortable speaking to the interviewer and, throwing out all the information. They won't really hold back as much, okay? They might feel more safe. So it does help out. It helps a lot when you are actually part of the same population. But the only, the problem with that, or what can be a problem, is if privacy is an issue, okay? If you need to be careful about the participant's privacy, then being part of the same population or the same community might be a problem there, okay? Okay, so another way that you can get bias, all this bias, all right, so another way that bias can happen is when the interviewer or the researcher is using a lot of vague wording with the participant. Okay, so sometimes if you're using a lot of vague terms, then it can get your participant to say things that may not be true, or they might be confused. It might induce a different response out of them. So you want to make sure that you can avoid using any kind of vague terms. You want to be specific, okay? Define things, right? So for example, like if you were interviewing people who are waiting in a doctor's office and you said, maybe one of the questions in your interview could be like, have you been waiting for a long time in the waiting room? Well, what's considered a long time? Because, the participant might actually be a really impatient person, and 10 minutes could be considered a very long time for them. But then some people might think that it's not a long time unless you've been sitting there for an hour. Okay, so instead of asking if they've been sitting around for a long time, maybe ask, how long have you been sitting in the waiting room? In minutes. Okay, so be a little bit specific about what they're doing, about what is going on and what your questions are. Also, it can actually help, like if you have to use vague terms in your research or in your questions, you can maybe use grounding language, like offer a definition or how your study defines something. Okay, so an example of how this can work would be, let's say if, let's say you were interviewing medical students and who were on their last year and they're about to become physicians. And the question is where 10 is extremely important and 1 is not important at all, like on a scale of 1 to 10, how important is it for you to have a controllable lifestyle in your future career? Okay, and now the participant might not really know what you mean by controllable lifestyle, like I can control all the people around me, my family. Are you saying I can control, my work schedule, my family life, my vacations? What do you mean exactly? What kind of controllable lifestyle? Just having overall control? It could mean almost anything. That's a very vague question, right? Well, then if you have to ask a vague question like that in your survey, what you should follow it by, or next to it, you should define what you mean by a controllable lifestyle. Okay, so you should say, well, a controllable lifestyle, we define controllable lifestyle as, one that allows the physician to control the number of hours devoted to participating his or her specialty, to practicing his or her specialty. Well, okay, that makes way more sense. And then you can answer, you can rate yourself wherever you fall along that whole line, but you can respond appropriately where that is the case. So the next thing we're going to look at is a lurking variable. Lurking, to sneak around and just You know, basically what a lurking variable will be in research terms is just a variable that is associated with a certain condition or like a response or, you know, something or a phenomenon, but it doesn't actually cause that condition or that phenomenon. It's just kind of, it's just associated with it. All right, it tags along with it. Okay, so some examples of what that could be. I mean, like, you know, what if, you know, everyone who is like a biker and rides motorcycles all day has tattoos, okay, and, you know, just it's so common for motorcyclists to get into accidents, then, you know, one might conclude, hey, you shouldn't get a tattoo because who knows, what if in the future you get into a motorcycle accident? Okay, obviously tattoos do not cause motorcycle accidents, but you know, it's something that can be associated with people who ride motorcycles, and many cyclists do get into accidents. It's kind of a common thing. Not that you're going to get into an accident if you drive a motorcycle, don't think that, but you know, just something that kind of lurks around and is associated with it, but doesn't really have anything to do with what it causes at all. All right. Another example could be like income level. Okay. I mean, we all kind of know, it's sort of like it's common knowledge, I guess, common culture that people who have large incomes usually have gone to college, okay? But doesn't necessarily mean that college will definitely get you a lot of money, okay? It's associated with that, yes, but not every job that you're gonna get out of college is gonna bring you money. It's gonna bring you a ton of money, okay? So that's another lurking variable. Also, you know, well, you get the idea. So you can go ahead and do your own, find your own examples, but you know what I mean. So lurking variables, they can cause problems, and we need to be more mindful of what, you know, of them and when they may be hanging around, okay? If you're conducting a study and you kind of see some sort of like lurking variable that's showing up, you know, it might be a lurking variable. It might be something that isn't necessarily causing something, but it just sort of goes hand in hand. It's just associated with that. But it's not a direct cause and effect. It doesn't have a cause and effect type of a relationship. Okay, like for example, studies show that while women and African Americans might make less money overall, it's not explained by, it's not caused by fewer of them working or fewer of them having degrees, okay? It's just kind of going hand in hand, all right? So when you're conducting a study and you notice something like that, it's fine to, and you have those suspicions that this is one of those lurking variables, it's fine to go ahead and document that. Go ahead and measure it, you know, just in case, but you may just kind of be putting it aside and not really using it in your study, okay? Because if it's a lurking variable, it's just something that's going to be associated with it, kind of going hand in hand, but it's not going to affect your study, okay? It's not going to have more of like a cause and effect type of a relationship with what you're trying to figure out, okay? So final thoughts on bias. See, in science, you really do owe it to try to eliminate or reduce as much bias as you possibly can in your studies, okay? Because this is for the progression of healthcare, it's for the progression of science, it's for the progression of all of us. So when you are conducting a study, it doesn't matter how you know, minor you think that it is, it's still information that you're providing for everyone. And if it's not really up to par, if your results aren't really reliable, we can't, then it's kind of a waste, okay? So it's very, very important to always pay special attention to trying to avoid the bias in the design and the conduct of your surveys, okay? Okay, so from here on out, now we're done with bias, let's go on to a few more things. So from here on out, we're going to look at some steps in a completely randomized experiment. Okay, so this is going to get exciting. We're going to learn how this is going to work. And then we're going to learn about what a placebo and a placebo effect is. Okay, and then blocked randomization and blinding. Okay, sorry, there should be an N right here. My bad. So anyway, why randomize? Why randomization? What the heck? So anyway, randomization is used to assign individuals to treatment groups, all right? So this type of a thing, if you're going to assign individuals and move them to different groups and then do a study on them, you're clearly not just observing them, right? Obviously. Okay, so if we go back to, remember we were talking about observational studies and then experimental studies? Well, if you're doing randomization, you are definitely doing an experimental study. You're not doing an observational study. Because remember, observational studies, we're just kind of leaving everything as it is and we're just observing or measuring. Okay, but if you're doing an experimental study, that means we kind of have to set things up and put all the pieces together, and then we, we might manipulate a variable here or there, and we'll see what the outcome is. All right, so randomization can only be done with an experimental study. Let me put that right here really quick. Experimental studies. Okay, so it can only happen with experimental studies. Anyway, so this helps to prevent bias in selecting members for each group. So if you're gonna, let's say you're gonna select members for this particular group where, this group is gonna take whatever pill, I don't know, they're gonna take a pill. And this group is not gonna take a pill, or maybe they're gonna take a placebo pill. We'll talk more about that in a little bit. But, so if you're going to separate your groups, they have to be random. You don't want to just put your favorites in one group and then the others in another. You don't want to just pick whatever you want to go where. They have to be random, okay? Why does it need to be random? Because it distributes everything evenly. Remember we just talked about lurking variables, those variables that just, sometimes they're just hanging around, they're just associated with certain things. Well, if we are randomizing our groups, the individuals in our groups that were, for our sample, well, you're evenly distributing your lurking variables. Okay, so, now we're gonna go through this whole little stage of, a whole randomized experiment, okay? So I developed this little concoction of a chart, so hopefully it helps you guys get a better visual of what's going on. So let's say you want to do a whole experiment, a randomized experiment, and you already picked out your population, you got your recruit sample, you're good to go. You have the group of people ready to participate in your experiment, okay? So next, what you're going to do is you're going to measure your co-founders and your outcome. So what that really is figure out what your lurking variables are, okay, what your lurking variables seem like they're going to be, and go ahead and measure out what those are, okay, because you need to take your initial measurements. All right, so take your initial measurements of everything, or weigh everything, whatever you got to do in this stage. Then you're going to move on to randomization. Okay, so this is where you're going to randomly put each participant into whatever group that they're supposed to go in. And I put a dice here because, I mean, you could do many different methods of randomizing people. I mean, you could you could do something like where with each individual that shows up in your sample, you could roll dice to see which group they're going to go in. Okay, so just make it totally random like that. You can also use there's a lot of software programs out there that will randomize your groups for you as well. I know Blackboard also has one. That's how I'm able to randomize and situate you guys into groups on Blackboard. Okay, so it's like the same thing. But yeah, there are softwares out there that can do this for you, or you can randomize things by hand. But however you want to do it, you're going to randomize and you're going to put them all into their own groups. So let's say you have two groups, Group A and Group B. Group A is the one that you're going to provide the treatment to. Maybe it's a pill, I don't know. Maybe you're giving them all a pill and you want to see what is going to happen. And these will get a pill with like a sugar in it or something, like a fake pill. Fake. All right, so there's nothing really going on with this group. They get the fake stuff. That's the placebo. Then you do your experiment, however long they're supposed to take this pill or however long this is supposed to last, you know, you do that. And then as you proceed or however, because you might be taking measurements at different intervals, you might be taking measurements at the very end. However, your experiment is supposed to go, you're going to be taking your measurements, okay? And then in the end, you're going to sort of analyze your results and figure it out that way. Figure out what happened. So let's talk about what a placebo and a placebo effect is. Just for a little bit, have you guys heard of that before? Do you guys know something about placebos? Kind of feel like most people do. A lot of people do. It's not just in science, but we do hear that in our everyday life and culture and talks and articles and, you know, stuff that isn't just meant for scientists, but it's meant for everybody. So the placebo and placebo effect is kind of out there. But just in case you're not really quite sure, so the placebo effect occurs when there's no treatment provided to one group. Okay, so this group that doesn't actually get the treatment, this group is going to be the control group. Okay, the control group or the comparison group. They're not getting they don't get the, whatever the treatment is, whether it's like a pill, whatever the treatment is, certain, I don't know, maybe they're told to do a certain exercise, or maybe they're told to do a certain, whatever the treatment is, whatever they're going to try to manipulate, and that in the experiment, that group is not going to get it. They are going to be regular. All right, they're just going to be, they're like the zero group. Okay, nothing. And the reason why it's so important to have that group is because you need to be able to compare the experimental group to something. Because if you have nothing to compare your experimental group to, then how do you know that the effects that happen to the experimental group are not just nature? Or how do you know they're not happening as a result of whatever treatment you gave them? Okay, how do you know if they're not, it's whatever the result is happening because of the treatment that you gave them, or if it just happens that way? Maybe it could be a different reason why the result is happening. But if you don't have anything to compare it to, a group that is, you know, has nothing, all right, the group that didn't get the treatment, then your results don't really have meaning. Okay, you have to be able to have something to compare it to. So it's so important for you to be able to have your experimental group and compare it to your control group, or your placebo group, or your comparison group, whatever you want, whatever name you want to give to this group. This particular group that got nothing, usually they don't know that they got nothing, okay? They don't know that they're not given a treatment. They think that they are, or they're assuming that they probably have been, but they may have been given a fake treatment, okay, so that, it doesn't really just, so that their mind is still in it and, they're still part of the experiment, but in the end, they're part of the group that you're going to compare to the experimental group. Okay. Okay, so block randomization. This is a way for you to be able to it's a method of randomizing people in your groups, participants in your group. So how this is going to work is pretend, all right, pretend that that each of these blocks right here, pretend that they, that these are empty blocks, okay? So pretend that these are all empty blocks, and what you can do is every time you get a participant, you can roll the dice right here, and that's whatever, number you kind of, whatever number you associated with each different little block, that will be what you're going to put, where you're going to put each participant. Okay, so for example, let's say the first person that we rolled for is a woman and her initials are XYZ. Okay, so, and that whatever we rolled on that dice, that number, we associated that number with this position in the block, right? So that's why we put XYZ here. Now next we roll again for another, another participant, and maybe that was a man, and the number that we got for that person, put them in this block right here. So we put BBJ right there. Okay, and then we roll again. Let's say the next one we did ended up being another man, and he, whatever number we rolled, put him in this block right here. Okay, so M and O. So that's very random, right? And then we just do so on and so forth. We just use that same method to put everyone in their respective blocks, okay, until everyone on the list has been put into a block. So that's blocked randomization. All right, now let's talk about blinding. Okay, so blinding, it's not like everyone has a blindfold on when they're doing research. It's nothing like that. So this is basically when we're just looking at two groups, the participants, okay, and then the research staff, the researchers. Okay, so in a blinding situation, that is where the participants do not know which group they fit in. Okay, they don't know. All right. So for ethical reasons, of course, you have to tell the participants, look, you're going to be put in one of either two groups, and one of them has a treatment, one of them will not have the treatment, and we are not going to tell you which one it is. You just have to sign yourself away, knowing that you're participating in science, and this is going to help. This is for the greater good, all right? But you're not going to actually know which group you fall into. We're just going to let the study happen, okay? So that is an example of blinding. That's what blinding is, okay? Also, another way you can do blinding is when, because sometimes in a study, an experiment, it's not just the participants that you don't want to know which group they fall into. It's also maybe the physicians that you are working with that are studying the participants. Okay, like sometimes if maybe like a neurologist and a radiologist both have to, take measurements of the participants, throughout the study, the researchers might not want the neurologist and the radiologist to be able to communicate with each other and talk about their opinions about the participants and things like that. So just for that reason, they're not going to tell them who's part of the which group that each participant falls in at all. So they don't know either. Okay. So if, that's also blinding. All right. Now, double blind, two blindfolds. Whoa. So double blind actually means that, of course, the participants don't know which group they're in, and neither do the researchers. The researchers don't even know, okay? Because and the reason why you would do this is to really, really weed out bias. Okay, the researcher, they found a way to make it so that they don't know which person is which. They might give each participant just a number, and that's all they are to them, so they can't actually associate the face with the number. Okay, and it could work that way. So while they're taking measurements, they don't know. Okay, they don't know who is who. They don't know if they're measuring a participant who's part of the placebo group, the comparison group, or it could be part of the experimental group, the group that has the treatment, but they don't know if that's who they're dealing with until the very end when they actually analyze the results and, figure out who is who and find out exactly what happened in the experiment. So that would be a double-blind study where the researchers don't even know. Okay, the researchers made it so that they don't even know who they're dealing with. Okay, which person is in what group. Okay, so just a quick recap before we bring lesson 1.3 to a close. All right, so we use randomization to reduce bias in our experiments. Remember, they're for experiments, not for observational studies. But randomization helps us reduce the bias that we have in our experiments. They're more randomized. Okay, it's not, so that way we're not actually picking the people that we want to be in which particular group. All right, we're allowing it to chance completely. We're not allowing ourselves to have any kind of control on that. Okay, so that helps to reduce some bias. A blocked randomization. Remember how blocked randomization, in a way, that kind of allows us to even out the groups or evenly distribute the lurking variables within those particular groups. You remember? And then blinding studies, well, this helps prevent further bias. Okay, this helps to make sure that we are, that the participants don't know what role they're actually playing in the experiment. Okay. And also, if we have any additional physicians who are helping with the experiment, they don't know, so that they can't communicate and, spill the beans, or, their observations and their opinions will not be biased in this experiment. So it's good to have a blinding, it's good to do some sort of blinding. And then the placebo effect is so necessary. Remember how necessary it is? That's so necessary because if you have a placebo group, that placebo group is going to act as your control, your comparison group, okay? Your comparing group, so that you have something to compare the experimental group with, okay? If you don't have anything to compare your experimental group with, then you don't even know if anything happened with your experiment, okay? So you have to see what it looks like if a group is completely normal, just letting nature do what it does, versus a group that has the treatment that you provided, okay? So you have to be able to compare. Anyway, that was it. Hope that you guys learned enough of lesson 1.3. I know that this one took a while, and I apologize for that. I am not going to make I will have other videos up soon, but this particular week, I am going to allow you guys to turn in your work a little bit late, so I'm going to push the due dates on everything a little bit further. But I don't want to make this a habit, okay? So hopefully everything will be out soon, okay? And you guys will have everything to work with. All right? Okay.